You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week here in the 602 Club, Christy Morris. Christy, did you get the soup or the special?
I got the special, and you know what? It wasn't so special.
Yeah. I thought you had enough stomach problems. I'm really surprised you went with the special.
Yeah, well, it sounded good, and then, I got a surprise.
Yeah. Well,
what happened to you?
Well, luckily I got the soup, so no surprise in the Cracker Jack box for me, which is really nice. But we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. We're going to talk about an old school film here, a classic at this point, cult classic, Spaceballs. And before we do that, just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for listening. And, of course, if you are listening, make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. If you are on Apple Podcasts, help us out. If you've never reviewed the show, the reviews really do help new people find the show when they're searching for podcasts. So we would really appreciate it if you would do that. And then, of course, like I said, subscribe so you get all the episodes as soon as they drop. You can find us on Twitter at the 602 Club, or on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. Please follow us in both places. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And then we've got the listeners only discussion group, the Babel Conference. Talk to listeners from all over the world. Also, you could find Trek.fm, where we've got all the podcasts we have here on the network. And then, of course, the contact section there, you can send Christy and I an email. And a huge thank you. We have some associate producers here through Patreon: Ken, Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Maillet, and Daniel Noah. Really appreciate these guys supporting the show each and every week. And again, you hear it every week, but it's so true. If you like the network and you want it to continue to grow, we really do need your help. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM, see how you can be part of our team. In the end, every little bit helps. So again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. So Christy, this is a movie that I know many people, sometimes it can be hard to even remember when your first experience was with the film. And so I'm wondering for you, do you remember the first time that you saw Spaceballs?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because it was this year.
Really? No way.
Which is weird because I've been a lifelong fan of Mel Brooks. I've seen Young Frankenstein and Robin Hood Men in Tights and things like that since I was young. Don't know how I never got around to Spaceballs, but I just saw that for the first time this year with my friend Erica. And then now this was my second viewing. So
that's hilarious, man. I'm so surprised. Obviously, it would have been something I figured you would have seen a long time ago, just because, it's one of those things that's kind of iconic. And I would say probably the ultimate film when it comes to just a spoof of sci-fi and the things that, both you and I really love. So that's so funny. Yeah. I have the complete opposite of you story in the sense that I do have a hard time remembering the first time I saw it. So I probably was like 13, when I saw this first time. I was obviously at that point very into Star Wars and Star Trek and all of the sci-fi things really they're making fun of. I think by that point I'd probably even seen the original Planet of the Apes, so I got all the jokes. To me, this movie was so funny, and it's kind of been one of those things where I was watching some of the extras that came on the new 4K disc that they had, and they were talking about, and it was an older documentary that you could tell had come from years back now, but they were talking about how the movie had kind of found even a second life, with home video, of course, and then like kids on college campuses finding it. And yeah, I mean, this was definitely a movie that my friends and I in college would pop in and just laugh at because, you know, I mean, you're in college and it's funny. So, you know, this is one of those type of films. So, it's very much akin to all of these type of films helped format some of my humor when it came to like this or Tommy Boy or Dumb and Dumber or, you know, all of those type of films, really kind of made for me what I thought was funny. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. So you just saw it this year with a friend of yours. Did they like show it to you or they tell you, oh, yes, Chris, you've got to see Spaceballs?
They showed it to me. So we had been talking about just Star Wars related stuff. And she was like, oh yeah, like such and such scene from Spaceballs. And I was like, I've actually never seen Spaceballs. And she's just took a breath and said, okay, you're coming over on Saturday and we're going to sit down in front of my TV and watch Spaceballs.
Nice. That's awesome.
She's like, you have to, as a Star Wars fan, especially, you have to see this.
Yeah, that's really funny. That's great. You know what? I never really thought of this in my head, which is kind of crazy that I wouldn't have kind of put this together. But you know, when it came to the production, I didn't realize that Mel Brooks had reached out to George Lucas and he had sent George Lucas the script actually to make sure there wasn't anything in there that kind of offended him. He didn't want to get in trouble, you know, obviously with Lucas. And I thought it was really funny because Lucas was all for this, you know, he's like, Lucas told him, I love your films. He's like, I've seen Blazing Saddles. I've seen, you know, Young Frankenstein. I love your movies. I trust your judgment. The only thing he asked for him not to do was to make action figures because they would look just like the action figures from Star Wars. And so Mel Brooks said, okay. And then even for the production, the post-production, ILM did the effects. So I just thought that was really funny that, and I think this is one of the things that I feel like I like about this movie and why I find it so rewatchable is that the way we're poking fun at a lot of different things, but it's always with a good heart, right? Like Mel Brooks himself is Jewish. He makes a ton of Jewish jokes in this film, right? But he's poking fun at himself and or his people, at Lucas allowing this to be made to poke fun at Star Wars. I think it just shows what a healthy sense of humor looks like.
Right, and that he's not, like you said, he's poking fun at Star Wars rather than making Star Wars the butt of the joke.
Right.
Because I think there's a big difference in like someone who hates Star Wars making a spoof to talk about how much they hate it. Whereas this is like he reached out to George to make sure it was okay and actually said he wanted it to be as close to the original as possible.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, I think it was Bill Pullman who said in one of the interviews, he said, you know, Mel Brooks told him, you can't spoof what you don't love.
Exactly.
And I think that shows here, you know, and I think that probably shows in all of his movies. I mean, the fact that, you know, he's spoofing silent movies and westerns and monster movies and Alfred Hitchcock movies and, you know, horror movies. Like he is, you know, spoofing Robin Hood, you know, obviously with Men in Tights. And so like he's somebody who takes what he loves and then pokes fun at it. And I think, again, you know, where we live today, I just almost feel as though that's something that we could learn from Mel Brooks, you know, how to have good, clean fun. And, well, I won't say all the jokes here are clean, but good fun at poking at what we love because we love it. Not because we hate it, right? And I think there's something so different, like you rightly pointed out. There's something so different than something that's really mean-spirited that you're making fun of, and something that you love and you make fun of it. And Mel Brooks does a great job of that, I think. And Spaceballs is a fantastic example of loving sci-fi, but also being able to be like, we can show this in a silly light, and it's funny.
Well, and I mean, if we as Star Wars fans even think about some of the stuff that exists in Star Wars canon, sometimes you just have to laugh at, like, you know, Meeper Gaskin.
Yeah. It's very, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's so much in Star Wars that can be made fun of. And part of that, you know, I think in the production of this, you know, Mel Brooks talked about when they were writing the script, he's like, you know, in many ways, we took the things that really work, and this is really just a fairy tale that he set up, you know, like where you have the prince who doesn't know he's a prince, you've got the princess who's in distress, you know, who needs to be kind of rescued, and you've got all of these things that you kind of put together that are very classic, which is exactly what George was doing when he was making Star Wars, which is pulling on all of the thematic elements that he loved and knew from mythology, putting them together, and so Brooks does the same thing to be able to create his comedy, and I think, you know, that's the other thing that really makes this work, is that he understands very well what he's spoofing. That's something that's really important, that you actually understand what it is that you're making fun of.
Mm-hmm. And like you were mentioning before, actually understand film as well.
Yes.
He's got all of these references that he's pulling from that really shows that he has such a wide variety of things he loves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because there's that scene where they're doing the whole thing about the videotape, you know? And he's like, what's happening now? What's happening now is happening now. What about earlier? That's already happened, you know? He's like, that whole thing is actually a reference to Abbott and Costello's Who's on First? What's on second? Like, but, you know, unless you know that, you might not pick up on that. But for those in the know, it makes it a little bit funnier, you know, I think. And that's really neat that he's, in many ways, too, we see Mel Brooks doing the same thing here with the story and the way he set up this movie, which is the same thing that Lucas was doing with his stories. Brooks is pulling from all of these famous comedies, you know, and comedy routines to help poke fun at the things that he loves. The same way that Lucas was pulling from all the stories and the kind of the serials and the type of stories that he really loved to create the story that he wanted to tell. And so I think that's really neat. They're both kind of in many ways doing the same thing.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's what makes this movie still so interesting and not just all completely a spoof, because it still has a good plot beneath all of the jokes. So, you know, it can stand on its own as a good movie, even if you didn't have all of the Mel Brooks style jokes. And, you know, that's something too that I wanted to add that I think makes this sometimes a love it or hate it thing for people, is that I think Mel Brooks has such a specific style in all of his movies. You know, once you've seen a couple of them, you're like, oh, okay, I get the Mel Brooks style now. Some people just don't like him.
Yeah.
And then some people, you know, like you and I, just fall in love with his stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, too, because it kind of reminds me of, you know, obviously John and I have gone through with Snyder Cuts talking about Zack Snyder's work, and Snyder is very much the same way. Like, you either like Zack Snyder and his style or you don't, you know? There's not a ton of in-between people in that. I think you're right, you know, and part of that, too, I think, is humor in general. There are types of humor that some people like, and then there are types of humor that some people don't. And so I think, you know, yes, Mel Brooks definitely has a specific sense of humor, and that might not appeal to everybody, but it definitely appeals to me. And it's also interesting, too, because to me, this movie also actually had a thematic element that kind of plays out slightly in the prequels, in the sense that, you know, Spaceball City is this kind of massive technological planet city, right? Where they've used all of their resources. And so then you have Druidia, which is kind of much more like Naboo. It's one with nature that surrounds it, you know, it's a much more peaceful type place. So you have this juxtaposition of these two things. And, you know, Lucas plays with that idea in the prequels a lot. obviously with like Coruscant and then other planets like Naboo. And so I just thought it was funny that this movie actually has a little bit to say about, something that is important in a really funny way. The fact that they're, losing their air, they're popping cans of Perrier air, which, doesn't really work, but it's very funny. Where, you have this other planet where they've stewarded well their planet. It's a beautiful place to live and everything, and it looks much more inviting than Spaceballs City in the end. And so I just thought, that's really funny. I have no idea if Mel Brooks was really trying to say anything with this movie, but I did find it interesting that there did seem to be a little bit of a theme there.
I would bet, just based off of his usual style, that there's a lot of things that seem like they might not be intentional, but they actually are. Because I don't know if you noticed later in the movie, after the merchandising joke, that at the diner, there's a placemat that says Spaceballs placemat. But you wouldn't know.
Yeah, you're right. And then in the bathroom, when President Scroob is going to the bathroom, there's Spaceballs the toilet paper.
Yep.
So yeah. No, you're right. He's definitely kind of poking fun about that idea, especially with Star Wars. And so I was really surprised to learn, because, obviously Bill Pullman is playing Lone Star here. And I was really surprised to hear that Brooks really wanted to get somebody like Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks for the role. And I was going to ask you, do you think that this would have worked at all with Tom Cruise?
No. That's the funny thing. I think that you need someone like Bill Pullman that's a little bit more, I hate to say it, but on the nerdy end, than, like Tom Cruise was really getting to the height of his career at this point, doing Top Gun and stuff. And I think that he was too much of a household name and a pretty face kind of look. And I think that it's not that Bill Pullman's not attractive. It's just that he's got a different vibe and mannerisms about him that make him more endearing in this role, I think, and remind me more of Han Solo than Tom Cruise would.
Tom Cruise can be very funny, especially, I don't know if you've ever seen Tropic Thunder, but yes. Tom Cruise is hysterical in that role. And part of that is he's kind of making fun of himself in some ways in that. So he can be very funny. But I think the thing that makes Bill Pullman work over Tom Cruise and even Tom Hanks, who, is a very funny, and Bill Pullman kind of has the classic hero vibe, right? And the nerdiness all at the same time, right? Because he's kind of suave, he can be, debonair and all those things. Here he's playing the kind of roguish cowboy Han Solo type, and he does that really well. And at the same time, he has this nerd twinkle in his eye, right? There's just something about him, and I think he was the perfect choice for this role. I don't think it would have worked well with either of those two, and I think he brings something to it where he's next to John Candy, who's one of the funniest guys on the planet, and he holds his own comedic-wise. Yeah. And part of that is that he plays slightly more of the straight man, of course, to John Candy's barf. And I think, again, Bill Pullman was just like the right person to cast. Like, I really can't imagine this movie with anybody else. I get, wanting to have a big name like Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks in the film, but I think the movie is, I don't know how many people have ever said this in their lives, but I think the movie is all the better for having Bill Pullman in the lead role.
You don't think people have said that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people have said that in their lives, but I mean, I do think in this role specifically, this is a role that works better with him in it.
And see, I think that he holds his own in other things that I've seen him in. And it's funny because as a kid, I actually knew him as the dad from Casper.
Yes. Well, and I know him from like Independence Day and While You Were Sleeping, which he's fantastic in as well. And I think it's actually that While You Were Sleeping vibe that he plays here. He kind of plays that casual, everyday guy who's, for the most part, pretty confident with himself, and so I think he really is. He's the perfect choice, and he is very funny. He has tons of great lines in this film.
Well, and you made a good point that you do need someone that can stand on their own next to John Candy, because John Candy had such a big personality that it's like, otherwise you would get lost. So I think that they really work well playing off of each other. And like you said, it's nice having the straight man versus the constant jokes from John Candy.
Yeah. John Candy his barf is just hilarious. Like the idea of being a Mog, half man, half dog, his own best friend.
Well, and I mean, he's just, there's these actors like that even though they're gone now are like a national treasure. Like that's what I think of as the definition of like an amazing actor that I can't believe is gone. John Candy was in like all my favorite movies growing up. So he is incredible again. And then too, it's just funny seeing him dressed as a dog.
Yeah, and in fact, did you know too? He wanted to have an appliance on his face so he looked more like a dog. And Mel Brooks was like, "No, we hired for John Candy. We need his face, and that's why he has the patch over his eye to give him just something to help with the dog effect." But I just thought that was funny. He really wanted to go for it with the full on makeup job and. They're like, no, we just need your face. So, no,
we hired you for you.
Yes. Well, and it was interesting. There's that one moment, Mel Brooks pointed this out. He was talking about just John Candy and his ability to ad-lib so perfectly, where, they're just getting out of the Winnebago and he goes to sit up and his seatbelt is still on and he ad-libbed, "Oh, that's going to leave a mark." And of course, it made the movie, but it just kind of shows you like those little lines that you wouldn't even really think of. He's just throwing in there, and it's funny stuff, So, I like you said, he's on a lot of movies I grew up with, and there's just something about him. He has just such a great presence in every movie, and he has, I think, the twinkle of authenticity. Like. And even in a role as ridiculous as this, he's playing the best friend of Lone Star. And everything he does in playing this role is very sincere. And I think that's something really special to be able to have at a comedic actor, to have sincerity there at the same time as you're being really funny. And I think that's, again, kind of what makes the movie work beyond just being funny, as you do buy characters like him in their storyline. I think that's really great.
The only thing that I will say that still kind of makes me uncomfortable, even on my second viewing, is when they're in the diner and his tail goes up the waitress's skirt.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a little awkward. Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's pretty awkward. Yeah. So there's definitely some things in here you might not have put in a movie, today. But I do think.
But the worst one, hands down, was the surgeon and the nurse.
I mean... Yeah, this is
funny, but yeah, if it was made today, oh no.
Yeah, probably not. Or well, even the president with the twins in his bed too. So
yeah, and that went on for a long time.
Yeah, I love earlier when they're in the office, like in the conference room area with all of them, and he says something to both of them, and he's like, "Chew your gum," like they're the double mint twins.
Oh yeah,
like that's funny. So
Charlene and Marlene.
Yes. Oh man. It's interesting because I knew Daphne Zuniga from I remember seeing her in the John Cusack film from Rob Reiner called The Sure Thing, and so here her playing this kind of like spoiled princess. I think she's hilarious in this movie. And part of that is because she's playing the straight man completely. Like she's playing it like she believes everything she's saying, and it's not a joke to her. Which is what makes, when she's like, it's my industrial-sized hairdryer, and I can't live without it. So funny.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, too, obviously he was trying to get people that look as much like the original Star Wars actors as possible, and she does definitely favor Carrie Fisher here. But yeah, it is funny that it's funnier that she plays it so seriously when some of the things she says are just absolutely ridiculous, like the thing about the hairdryer or, but then too, she's really great at then playing off of Bill Pullman in the scenes that are supposed to be sincere romantic moments, which adds so much more to it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the moment, when they're around the fire and they're having the conversation about how she's like, oh, I should go back and marry him. I should do it's the right thing. And, you don't really need love, you don't really. And they start to get closer and closer. And there is a sweetness and a sincerity, I think, to that as well that does make it work. And part of that is her performance. I think the other part of her performance I love is when she goes all Rambo on the guards and like she just, it's almost like something snaps, and it was the way she plays it is so funny because her hair got singed, and I just thought that was really, really funny. So,
well, if you want to upset a woman, singe her hair.
Apparently, I'll let you say that. So, I'm gonna let you be the one that said that, and I'll just agree with you. Yes.
Okay.
So,
but yeah, it was a funny scene, and then once again, also similarities to Princess Leia. That she took up a blaster in Star Wars and held her own.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think she's really funny in this movie, and again, I think they did kind of get somebody who was not somebody would have necessarily thought of, like maybe slightly against type in the sense that she really hadn't done this kind of role. And she turns out to be very, very funny. And so I think they did a great job. And what's fascinating too is that, for Dot Matrix, they weren't planning on having Joan Rivers do the voice because they were going to have Lorraine Yarnell, who did the physical on-screen performance, play her, and then the voice just wasn't right. And so Mel Brooks called her up and asked her to do it, and she's like, I had no idea, and I can't imagine I honestly just can't imagine not having her there. I mean, she makes that role.
Well, and if you know much about Joan Rivers, aside from the plastic surgery bit, she was a comedian. So before she ever got into doing the, talk shows and Fashion Police and stuff later in her career and all of that, she was a comedian. And so she has a really unique voice, and she is really funny. And so I'm glad that they chose her for this because, yeah, I'm the same as you. I can't imagine it being a different voice. And I think that uniqueness really adds so much more to that character because that's kind of what was done with 3PO. You can't imagine 3PO without the voice of Anthony.
Anthony Daniels, yeah. No, I agree with you. I think you're right. And so, I mean, she does a great job. And of course, the other person here, Rick Moranis as Dark Helmet, one of the things I thought was so interesting about him is Mel Brooks talking about how he was so good with improvisation and coming up with great ideas, and that Mel loved most of them. He's like, it was so infuriating sometimes because, he'd come up with something and it would be perfect. It would be great, and we'd end up using it. And so I think that's something that is really fun. And he's just ridiculous in this role, but he's so funny. He's so funny. And all of his lines, you know, about like, knock next time you come in, you know, like, did you see anything? No, I didn't see you playing with your dolls. You know, like it's
right.
amazing. So.
And he's so good too at the physical comedy. Half of it's the expressions on his face.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, another one that I grew up watching tons of things with him in it. You know, Ghostbusters, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, all of that. I love him. But he's great in this role too, because he's such a stark contrast to Vader, whose, you know, body double was so tall, and Rick Moranis is so short. And then, you know, all of the jokes about Dark Helmet versus, you know, Darth Vader, and him constantly running into things. And then I like that they make fun of the rank he has. So, you know, like they instead of getting the chokehold, they use the ball shrinker or something.
Oh, yes.
You know, and then every time he addresses the crowd, they say, yes, sir, and cross their legs.
Yeah.
And then I think my favorite joke that he makes in the whole movie is, well, you know, I have to have coffee when I watch the radar.
Yes. Like, yeah. I mean, his whole art, you know, who would dare give me the raspberry? Lone Star, you know, and just like all of that's hysterical. So no, he's fantastic. You know, I think obviously Mel Brooks here playing Yogurt and President Scroob, and I think he does such a great job with both of those. Very funny, and you know I think he's perfect for, you know, the incompetent leader of Planet Spaceball. You know, him playing the goofy parody of Yoda is fantastic. And so, I mean, he's funny. And I think one of the things that I kind of like about him, you know, too, in the movie is like, he's not the main focus of the movie. You know, even though he has both of these roles, like I think he really does a great job of letting everybody else shine. So.
Yeah, well, and that's something you will probably notice he does in all of his movies. He usually makes a cameo, but he doesn't steal the show. And he's really good about that and letting everyone else really run things and do what they're there to do. I think that he always really respects every actor's contribution. And then it brings in this funny side character aspect to it. Like, actually, I don't know if you knew, Scroob is an anagram of his name.
Yes. Yeah, he was saying how it's almost Brooks backwards, almost. And so, yeah, I think that is really funny. And so, he does a great job. And I love to you bring in somebody like Michael Winslow, and then you have John Hurt there, reprising his role from Aliens, you know, just to do the one joke. You know, that's just funny. You know, to think about those and like kind of throw them in, especially as just side jokes, basically, were great. You know, and why not utilize talent like that? So.
Well, and George Weiner, which is so funny, apparently was originally planned to be Steve Martin to play that role as Colonel Sanders.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So I don't remember how they said George ended up with the role, but I'm kind of glad he did, because Steve Martin, as much as I love him, could also maybe kind of steal the show. And I think that this person needed to play well alongside Rick Moranis and really let him lead things. So I'm kind of glad it wasn't Steve Martin in this case.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I mean, I'm trying to think if you know, with Steve Martin, how I would feel about him being there. And I do think that you would almost overshadow Rick Moranis in some ways, and that's definitely not what you want. You in many ways, like George Weiner was talking about the whole point of him was to be the setup man. You know, he's setting up all the jokes, and I think, you know, with Steve Martin, you expect him to be the one landing the jokes, and so I'm glad that they didn't go that way.
And these two work so well together. Like you were saying, you know, the joke about who's on first thing with now and then. And then I love, what are you afraid? Chicken.
Yeah. What's wrong, Colonel Sanders? Chicken? Yeah. There's just so much ridiculously good stuff in here. And, I had a question then on that for you, which is with the jokes, there's so in here. But one of the things about comedy is the question of, why does it work and why? So I wanted to ask you here, I'm still laughing at these jokes years later, right? I've seen this movie countless times now, and I'm still laughing at the jokes. And so why do you think that the jokes still hold up in this?
Well, I will say part of it is just, if you like Mel Brooks' style, then you're going to like this and you're going to continue to like it. But also, it's kind of funny to say, but he's kind of the original guy with the dad jokes. I feel like a lot of these are like what we would call the dad jokes that you would say technically is kind of a cheesy joke. Like we just said that, Colonel Sanders, what's wrong, chicken? But you still can't help but giggle a little bit because they're so cheesy. Or, combing the desert and they take it literal. And then I love just the random guy. We ain't found.
Yeah. That's still one of the, who doesn't continually use that line in actual real life, So.
Right. All the time.
Yeah.
And then he's really good at, he'll make dirty jokes, but they're not always blatant. Or if he does, they're just kind of, innuendo rather than outright like a disgusting joke.
Right.
So, you pan by the arm of the ship that's holding the handle of the vacuum.
Yeah. Well, what's really fascinating is that Mel Brooks was talking about in the interviews that actually Rick Moranis threw a ton of the innuendo, especially into like the ring battle fight. The dirty jokes that Mel Brooks himself was kind of afraid to write, and he put them in there. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Like, I see your Schwartz is as big as mine.
Exactly. It's exactly. So I thought that was interesting. That it was really Moranis who kind of upped the ante when it came to some of those jokes there. So it's funny, right? Like the part of all this is learning to just like laugh at ourselves and the things that we can sometimes take overly seriously sometimes, and laughter really is good for us, and to laugh at all those things and to be able to poke fun at not only the things we love, but again, I think in many ways, those type of things we're poking just fun at ourselves. The things that sometimes we get all uptight about. And I think it's good and healthy for us to learn to kind of like let go sometimes. And this movie, I think the reason that the jokes work is because of the fact that it's based in something that people love, and we're poking fun at it, as we talked about earlier. We're poking fun at it because we love it. And therefore, that's what makes the jokes last. And I did want to ask you, because obviously this is a movie to which a lot of the humor, or what the humor is pulling from, a lot of people might not know these days, but this is a movie that I think does continue to be popular. And so I wanted to ask you, why do you think that this movie endures as well? Like, not just the jokes, but why do you think people continue to go back to this movie?
I think, for one, that it makes the jokes in a way that then might make you look up what they're referring to. So, like you see the monkeys on the beach and you may not know that that's Planet of the Apes. And so you look it up and then you're like, oh, what's Planet of the Apes? And then go and find out more about that. Or, oh, what's Blazing Saddles, when they show all of his movies on home video in that one scene. So I like that he does that. He makes enough of a joke to where you may not completely get it on first watch, but you might then go find the answer yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I really do. And so I think you're absolutely right that in many ways, it's interesting how this kind of does parallel Star Wars. In that sense, Star Wars has sent so many people on quests to find like Kurosawa films and things like that George Lucas was pulling from. Go back and watch, old 1940s serials like the Flash Gordon stuff or, things like that. I think that, to read Joseph Campbell, and so, to be able to watch this film and then be able to go and be like, man, I'd love to see some of the humor that inspires this, like an Abbott and Costello or things like that. That is great. And so I absolutely agree with you. I do think that's one of the reasons that this movie continues to kind of, stand the test of time in that. And so, I love, the fact that, we get to kind of dive into, movies like this that are just, it is good to have films that are just funny and stuff. So I am kind of interested. What do you rate Spaceballs?
So I know sometimes maybe I rate things a little high, but I still think that this has so many other things to offer that we just talked about and that people probably don't give it enough credit sometimes because it has all of this other depth to it. So I think that for me, it's a 4 out of 5 Schwartz rings because it's just got a lot of things all together that end up working that you might underestimate at first, but then you watch it and you actually go, wow, this holds up. And it's funny, but it's also got some heart to it. And then got some big actors like John Candy and then, Mel Brooks working on it and appearing in it. And it really, to me, ends up being something I'm going to watch many more times.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm right there with you in the rating. Like, it's 4 out of 5 for me. And part of that is it's so funny and it continues to be funny. And the most important thing for me with a film like this and a comedy film is that I would want to continue to watch it over and over again. And this is definitely one that I continue to want to go back to because it's hilarious. And it's goofy and silly, and, I love it. So I'm definitely glad to have returned to Spaceballs. And so we have, though, reached the part of the show, Christy, where it's time for our recommendations. So I can't wait to see what you're going to be recommending to everybody this week.
So I'm going to be a little silly since we reviewed a silly movie. And I'm going to recommend going and watching Young Frankenstein if you haven't. Because that's, I believe, no, it's not the first one I saw. The first Mel Brooks film I ever saw was Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is also excellent. But, Young Frankenstein, I think it's fascinating that they decide to do in black and white. And they bring in a lot of other big name actors in that one as well. Most importantly, Gene Wilder as Dr. Frankenstein. And there's just a lot of really good jokes in that style again, that I still make all the time in my life. Like I can't count how many times I've said, would you like to go for a roll in the hay? So yeah, it's such a good movie. And that's something my dad and I watch and joke about. And I think that if anyone hasn't seen it, you definitely need to.
Yeah, that's great. So, well, I am going to recommend something that I just got a chance to go see in the theater, and it's called Wrath of Man, and it is with Jason Statham, and it's directed by Guy Ritchie, and this is basically, if anybody knows, Guy Ritchie kind of doing his Michael Mann impersonation, director of Heat. This is, a much more serious film, a much grittier film than a lot of the things that you might see Guy Ritchie do. He strips a lot of he's kind of famous for his stylistic nature. He strips a lot of that away here, and I think it absolutely works here in this movie, and it's very good. So I would highly recommend going to check that out. I think you definitely would appreciate seeing it. It's excellent. So yeah, hopefully everybody will enjoy that. But Christy, if people want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, how can they find you?
Yeah, so when I'm not here on 602 Club, I also do a show with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells. And we just got done with our 2-part review of Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Very nice.
And then we're going to, thank you. And next we'll be talking about how we got into our Marvel fandom. We're going to spend a whole episode on just that, and then continue to talk about some more Marvel stuff, and maybe also do one, since I've talked about my love of Catwoman on here, a DC fandom episode. So,
nice.
Yeah, hope you guys will check that out, Sabers and Spells. And I sometimes appear online. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BestBenBell, and in the Babel Conference.
And you can find me all over the place in social media, MattRushing02 on all of the different sites. If I'm there, just search for that name and you'll find me. Please, follow me, and I love to strike up a conversation with you. Of course, you can also find me here on the network. Snyder Cuts here in this same feed. John and I are going to be talking about Army of the Dead coming up soon from Zack Snyder. It's dropping soon there on Netflix. And in fact, this week, as we're recording, I'm going to go see it in the theater. They're doing a special 1-day showing of it in a theater near me, so I could not be more excited. You can also, of course, find me doing Literary Treks and The Orb. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And over on the Nerd Party Network, John Mills and I do a show called Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast. So if you love Star Wars, we love talking Star Wars over there, so I hope you'll check that out. And then wrapped up the Harry Potter series with Drea Kaufman, where we talked about each and every chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. So I hope you'll take a listen to that. But thank you so much for joining us.
And beam me up, Snotty.